Hey, I'm James. I'm 38 years old. I make a living mending appliances, washing machines, dryers, fridges, and every now and then a retro radio. My home's a quaint little place on a serene street where the ancient oaks outlast most of the neighbors. It's the same house where I spent my childhood. My life moves to a steady beat, a comforting routine I've grown to depend on. Each morning greets me with the rich scent of coffee and the faint hum of the heater in the colder months. Nights wind down with the lingering smell of solder and oil on my fingers, along with a gratifying ache in my muscles. My garage houses a workshop brimming with blueprints, spare components, and the silent companionship of machines that calmly await my efforts to decipher their issues. Folks often remark that my lifestyle seems solitary, but I've never viewed it that way. There's a calm satisfaction in unraveling the logic of a faulty circuit, a kind of clarity that's rare in human interactions. My daily routine was a stronghold of straightforward, repetitive tasks. Rise, brew coffee, hop in the van for a repair job, hear the soft clatter of tools in the back, return home, tinker in the garage, eat supper leaning over the counter, dive into a book, then sleep, a tidy cycle. It felt sufficient, or at least I'd persuaded myself it was. Years ago, my dad transformed the upstairs of our house into a small apartment, a project he left half done but leased out regardless. For the past 2 years, it stood vacant. I cherished the quiet. It made the house feel truly mine. Every squeak and moan was familiar, but rising property taxes began to make the silence feel less like tranquility and more like an empty void. So I posted an ad online. Within a week, a young guy named Ethan moved in. He was a college student, full of jittery energy, hauling boxes stuffed with textbooks and gaming gear. He struck me as a decent kid, reserved and private, which worked perfectly for me. I lugged a heavy dresser up the tight staircase for him, and in exchange, he vowed to keep the noise low. Fair deal. 2 days after Ethan settled in, I met her. I was in the garage, carefully scrubbing a lawnmower's carburetor, my hands coated in dark grease. The side door squeaked open, and Ethan stood there, looking sheepish. "Hey, James, sorry to interrupt," he said, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. "The fridge upstairs isn't cooling." I wiped my hands on a cloth, the grime only rearranging itself. "I'll check it out," I replied. I trailed him up the outdoor steps to his apartment, where the door stood slightly open. Inside, a woman knelt on the floor, tackling a stubborn stain on the hardwood. Her back was to me, her hair tied up in a loose, messy bun, dressed in a plain gray hoodie. "My sister, Emily," Ethan announced as we entered. She glanced back over her shoulder, pausing for a moment, caught between kneeling and rising. She was striking, but it was a weary kind of beauty, with faint shadows under her eyes like smudged charcoal. Her smile didn't quite touch her eyes. A courteous, practical smile. "Hi," she said, her voice deeper than I'd anticipated. "James," I said with a nod. "Ethan mentioned the fridge isn't working." She stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Yeah, we loaded it with groceries last night, and everything's just warm. Sorry to drag you away from your work." "It's what I do," I answered, and her lips quirked slightly, her smile warming just a bit. I pulled the refrigerator out from the wall. The compressor sputtered on, then off, a telltale sign of trouble I recognized instantly. I knew it was a faulty relay before I even popped open the back panel. It was a quick fix. They lingered in the cramped kitchen, watching me work. Ethan was glued to his phone, already checked out. But Emily's eyes followed my hands. She stayed silent, just observing as I snipped wires, removed the broken part, and dug in my pocket for the spare relay I always kept handy. Her gaze held a quiet intensity, as if she saw something almost magical in the straightforward act of repair. A few minutes later, the compressor purred steadily, a healthy hum. I pushed the fridge back into place. It's fixed now. Give it a couple of hours to cool down. Thanks, Emily said. She cracked open a lukewarm soda can from the counter. Can I get you something? Water? A sadly warm Coke? I nearly declined. My usual instinct was to wrap up a job and retreat to my own space, but a spark of hope in her expression made me hesitate. Water sounds good. Thanks. She grabbed a bottle from a pack on the floor. Our fingers grazed for a split second as she handed it to me. It was nothing, just a fleeting touch, but it sent a faint spark through me, piercing the walls I'd built around myself for years. For a brief moment, our eyes locked, and I saw it again. A deep, soul-weary exhaustion. It was a look I knew well, mirrored in my own face during my loneliest nights. Then it vanished, hidden behind another polite smile. Well, I said, stepping toward the door. Let me know if anything else acts up. We will, she replied, her tone carrying the weight of a vow. I returned to my garage, but the familiar scent of grease and oil felt stale. The quiet pressed heavier than before. I kept thinking about how she'd watched my hands, as if fixing something was a rare kind of wonder she hadn't encountered in ages. I wondered what in her life was broken, beyond the reach of a new relay and some pliers. It wasn't my place to ask, but the question lingered long after I'd finished the lawnmower and scrubbed the grime from my hands. A week later, Ethan texted me, dishwasher's making a strange grinding sound. I headed upstairs. Emily was there, seated at the small kitchen table with a closed laptop. She mentioned Ethan was at the library. She'd brewed a fresh pot of coffee and offered me a mug. I took it. The grinding noise was just a fork that had slipped into the dishwasher's base. Simple to sort out. We chatted as I worked, keeping it light. The weather, the town. She asked about my house, whether I'd always lived here. Pretty much my whole life, I said, securing a hose clamp. My dad built this apartment upstairs. He loved starting projects but wasn't big on finishing them, she said with a playful lilt. I grinned. Yeah, he'd leave the wrapping up part to me. Talking to her was effortless, or more accurately, being quiet with her was. The pauses weren't uneasy. They felt natural, filled only by the clink of my tools and the steady tick of her wall clock. She shared that she was an editor working remotely. She didn't bring up a husband, and I didn't pry. This settled into a fresh pattern. Every couple of weeks, another thing would go wrong. The thermostat would jam. A tap would start leaking slowly. A screen door's hinge would wobble loose. Ethan was never there. It was always just Emily, ready with a mug of coffee and a calm presence that soon became the cornerstone of my week. Deep down, I realized a house this size shouldn't have so many issues. The leak from the faucet likely wasn't that bad, and the thermostat was probably okay. But I kept showing up because she kept reaching out. Our talks gradually grew richer, shifting from surface-level chatter to something more intimate. She shared bits of her life in cautious, measured phrases, as if dipping her toes into deeper waters. She described a city life that sparkled outwardly but felt empty at its core. She mentioned her husband, David, only a couple of times. His name always came with mentions of work trips or late nights at the office, a distant figure, more shadow than substance in her narrative. He's not a fan of small towns, she said one afternoon, watching me reseal the caulk around her bathtub. He thinks there's nothing going on here. There's plenty to do, I replied. It's just a quieter kind of life. I crave that quiet, she said, her tone hinting at a life starved of peace. I started eagerly awaiting Ethan's texts, those made-up crises that drew me upstairs. Her apartment became a refuge from my own rigid solitude. It was a new kind of stillness, one we shared. I began to read her moods like a familiar book. The way she gripped her coffee mug told me if it was a bright day or a heavy one. I could spot the strain in her shoulders when she was masking her sorrow, and I noticed it ease as we sat together, wordless, just soaking in the soft creaks of the house settling around us. While I repaired her appliances, it felt like she was mending something in me. Each visit shaved away the corrosion that had built up around my heart. Emotions I hadn't touched in years stirred. A soft, stubborn hope, a yearning for the sound of her key turning in the upstairs lock. It was both frightening and exhilarating. I wasn't just the guy downstairs anymore. I was James, waiting for the next thing to need fixing. One Thursday evening, it happened. A text came late, around 9 o'clock, from Ethan as usual. "Hey James, the garbage disposal's acting up with a weird noise. Emily's here. Can you come up?" I knew it was a ruse. I'd installed that disposal myself 2 months ago. It was practically brand new. But I slipped on my shoes and went anyway. The air was crisp, tinged with the first whispers of fall. My steps echoed on the wooden stairs in the evening stillness. The door was unlocked. I eased it open carefully. The apartment was dim, lit only by a small lamp on the kitchen counter, casting a warm, golden glow across the space. Ethan was nowhere in sight. Emily sat at the table, her back to me, her shoulders trembling slightly. I paused in the doorway, my hand gripping the frame. Part of me wanted to back away, to give her space, but my feet stayed rooted. "Emily?" I murmured, my voice barely audible. She didn't turn. "The disposal's fine," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "I'm sorry. I couldn't come up with another reason." I stepped inside, gently closing the door behind me. I crossed to the kitchen table and took the seat across from her. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and puffy. The careful poise she always carried had vanished, replaced by a raw, unguarded fragility that stole my breath. "It's all right," I said, the only words I could muster. She let out a shaky breath, part chuckle, part sob. "Is it? Nothing feels right." She stared at her hands, clenched into tight fists on the table. "David thinks I'm at book club. We haven't had a book club in 2 years. It fell apart." She met my gaze, her eyes searching for something. Not answers or fixes, just someone to truly see her. "He didn't even ask what book we're reading," she went on, her voice quivering. "He hasn't asked me anything real in years. We're just circling each other, two lonely planets in a lifeless system. Sometimes I feel like I'm screaming inside, but no sound comes out." The silence in the room was vast, cradling her confession, her pain, her weariness. I didn't try to fill it with words. I didn't offer solutions or promise everything would be okay. I just sat with her, a quiet witness to the truth she'd finally voiced. I reached across the table, my fingertips lightly brushing her clenched fist. It wasn't a romantic move, just a grounding one. A simple way to say, "I'm here. You're not alone right now." Slowly, she opened her hand, turning her palm upward. I laid my hand over hers, We stayed like that for a long while, bathed in the soft light of the lamp, the house's gentle creaks enveloping us. Her tears began to fade, and the tightness in her shoulders softened. "Thank you, James," she whispered at last. "You don't need to thank me," I replied. In that moment, something changed between us. The fragile facade, the faulty appliances, the casual coffee fell away like dust. We were just two people in a softly lit kitchen, sharing a silence more honest than any words I'd ever spoken. I knew then I'd do anything to preserve that quiet space for her, to be the one she could share it with. I had fallen in love, not with the polished woman who offered me coffee, but with the broken soul across from me, her hand resting in mine. My orderly, predictable life was gone. A new one, uncertain, daunting, yet brimming with hope, was dawning. The next 2 weeks were hushed. No more invented emergencies came. We'd crossed a threshold and we both felt it. We didn't speak of that night. There was no need. A quiet understanding bound us, a secret we both carried. When I'd see her coming or going, we'd share a small, knowing smile. The sadness still lingered in her eyes, but now there was a spark of resilience, a determination that hadn't been there before. Then, one Saturday afternoon, everything shifted. I was in my garage, the wide door open to the crisp autumn air. I was carefully cleaning the contacts on a vintage amplifier, a task demanding my full attention. The sharp scent of contact cleaner filled the space. That's when a car rolled into my driveway, a sleek black Mercedes, so glossy it mirrored the sky's clouds. It looked alien on our modest street, like a visitor from another realm. A man stepped out from the driver's side, tall, clad in a crisp navy blue suit, his shoes likely worth more than my monthly mortgage. He carried an air of effortless authority, as if the world was his to command. He didn't glance my way, his eyes fixed on the house with a mix of impatience and scorn. It had to be David. He marched toward the upstairs apartment, his polished shoes grinding against the gravel. He didn't bother knocking, just called out in a sharp, cold voice, empty of warmth. "Emily, you ready? We're running late." His words weren't an inquiry, they were an order. I froze, gripping a small screwdriver, a surge of protective anger tightening in my chest. I wanted to stand, to tell him to soften his tone, to show some respect. But I knew it wasn't my battle. My place was to be her safe haven, not her champion in a fight. Stepping in would only complicate things for her. The upstairs door swung open, and Emily stepped onto the landing. From my spot in the garage, I watched her change in an instant. The spark of resilience I'd noticed in her over the past couple of weeks flickered out, snuffed like a candle in a sharp breeze. Her posture sagged, her face settling into a blank, guarded expression. She wore an elegant, formal dress I'd never seen before, looking like someone else entirely, playing a role. "I'll be down in a moment, David," she called, her voice flat and submissive. He glanced at his wrist, where a sleek silver watch glinted. "5 minutes," he said curtly, not bothering to wait for her response. He turned back to his car, already engrossed in his phone, radiating a cold, detached air of indifference. Emily's gaze met mine across the yard. For one heart-wrenching second, her facade cracked, revealing panic, despair, and a silent cry for help. I held her eyes, not smiling or waving, just locking my gaze with hers, trying to channel all the strength and patience I could muster into that single look. I wanted her to know, without words, that I was still here, that this man and his gleaming car didn't change what we'd built, that our shared quiet space was still hers. She gave a tiny, almost invisible nod before turning and slipping back into the apartment. I returned to my amplifier, but my hands trembled, making the delicate task impossible. The garage's silence, once a comfort, now felt oppressive, like the charged stillness before a thunderstorm. I'd passed the test, staying in my place, but I'd never felt more powerless in my life. The storm hit a week later. It was late past midnight. I was in bed, flipping through a book, when I heard it. A muffled yell from upstairs, followed by another, harsher shout. A man's voice, David's, cold and cutting. I couldn't catch the words, just the biting tone. Then a door slammed so hard it shook a picture frame on my wall. A car engine roared, tires screeching as it tore out of the driveway and down the street. Then, a heavy, unsettling quiet. I sat up, heart racing. I considered going upstairs to check on her but held back, forcing myself to wait. This was her moment, her choice. My showing up could only muddy the waters. I had to trust her, to believe in the strength I'd seen growing in her. 20 minutes crawled by, the silence thin and brittle. I got up, went to the kitchen for a glass of water, my ears straining for any sound from above. Nothing but the low hum of my fridge. Then I heard it. A soft, tentative knock, not at the upstairs door, but at my back door leading to the yard. I opened it. Emily stood there, framed by the faint glow of the porch light, clutching a single, weathered suitcase. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady, free of tears or fear. In their place was a calm, unwavering determination. She'd made her decision. She didn't ask to come inside or to stay. She just looked at me, her gaze firm. "Could you drive me to the bus station?" she asked, her voice quiet but resolute. I didn't press for details, what happened, where she was headed, or if she'd return. She didn't need questions. She needed a lift. "Sure thing," I said. "Let me grab my keys." I took her suitcase, setting it gently in the back of my van among the toolboxes and spare parts. She slid into the passenger seat silently. The drive to the bus station was wordless. The empty streets of our small town bathed in the lonely orange glow of streetlights. I left the radio off. The quiet felt right, respectful. The bus station was a stark, overly bright place, reeking of antiseptic and a faint undercurrent of desperation. A handful of people sat scattered on hard plastic chairs, each lost in their own thoughts. I glanced at the departure board. A northbound bus was leaving in 45 minutes. "I've got a friend in Portland," Emily said, as if reading my mind. "I can crash with her for a bit." "All right," I replied. I got her a coffee from a vending machine. Awful stuff, but she cradled it like it was a lifeline of warmth. We sat on the uncomfortable chairs, her suitcase at her feet. It felt like both an ending and a beginning, a strange mix of closure and possibility. When her bus was called, we stood. There was a brief, awkward pause. What do you say in a moment like this? No words could capture the gratitude, fear, and hope swirling between us. "Thank you, James," she said, her eyes holding mine, "for everything. The drip of faucets, the coffee, just sitting quietly with me." "Stay safe, Emily," I said, feeling the words fall short, but they were all I had. She reached out, giving my arm a quick, firm squeeze, a small but certain goodbye. Then she turned, grabbed her suitcase, and headed for the bus without a backward glance. I watched until the automatic doors hissed shut behind her. I stood there a long time, staring at the empty space she'd left, the faint warmth of her touch lingering on my arm. I walked back to my van, alone in my silent, empty house. Time moved slowly, steadily, like a faucet I couldn't fix, dripping endlessly. Those first few weeks were tough. The house's quiet wasn't the comforting solitude I'd once known. It was a void. Every creak from the empty apartment upstairs felt like a ghost of her presence, a reminder of what was gone. Ethan moved out a month after Emily left, doing it quietly with a few college buddies. He left the key on the kitchen counter with a brief note scrawled on a scrap of paper. "Thanks for everything. Tell Emily I'm sorry." The apartment was truly empty again. I walked through its bare rooms, the air still and stale. The faint trace of her coffee was gone. It was just a space now. I slipped back into my old routine, but it felt empty. Fixing things still brought satisfaction, the logic of machines still a solace, but my life's tidy loop now felt like a trap. I'd tasted something deeper, a connection beyond circuits and wires, and its memory clung to me. Emily and I stayed in touch, but it was careful, infrequent. A text from her every week or so. A photo of a misty morning over the Willamette River with a note. "Found a good coffee spot." Another of a book she was reading. This one hit me hard. They were small signs of life sent across the distance. She was carving out a new path, and I knew she needed room to do it without the weight of whatever we were or could be. My responses were simple too. A picture of a 1950s toaster I'd restored. Its chrome shining, "Makes flawless toast." A shot of the first snow dusting my yard. "It's peaceful out here today." We were holding on to a fragile connection. A slender thread stretched over hundreds of miles, careful not to pull too hard and break it. Months rolled by. Autumn faded into winter's deep chill, then softened into spring's muddy hope. The upstairs apartment stayed vacant. I got a few inquiries, but I always found an excuse not to rent it. The timing was off, or the applicant seemed too noisy. Truth was, I was holding it for her. A quiet, hopeful act she didn't know about. One Tuesday in late April, I was at the diner, a timeless spot with red vinyl booths and a counter smoothed by years of elbows and coffee mugs. It was my haunt. I sat in my usual booth, sipping coffee and skimming the newspaper. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up out of habit. My heart stopped. It was her. She stood in the doorway, squinting against the diner's bright lights. Her hair was a bit shorter, and she wore a simple blue dress I didn't recognize. But the real change was in her eyes. The heavy, weary sadness had vanished entirely, replaced by a calm, grounded peace. She looked radiant, like she'd finally found her true self. Our eyes locked across the room. A warm, genuine smile spread across her face, brightening everything around her. She walked toward my booth. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. I could barely breathe. "It's been waiting for you," I managed to say. She slid into the booth across from me. The waitress came by, and Emily ordered a black coffee. We sat for a moment, just looking at each other, the diner's hum fading into the background. "You're back," I said, pointing out the obvious. "I am," she confirmed. "Got a little place on Elm Street. The divorce is done. Everything's quiet now. We didn't mention David or the night she left. No need to dig up the past. It was over. We talked about her time in Portland, her new job at a small publishing house, now done remotely. We talked about my work, the vintage radio I was still fiddling with. The conversation flowed easily, like we just paused it yesterday, not left it hanging for 6 months. She gazed at me over her coffee cup, her expression open and serene. "That upstairs apartment," she said. "Is it still empty?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, warmth spreading through me. I thought of the rigid, predictable life I'd once lived, the fortress of routine I'd built. That version of me felt like a stranger now. The man sitting here, across from the woman who'd upended his world and then reshaped it into something brighter, was new. He was steady. He was hopeful. "Yeah," I said, a smile creeping onto my face. "It's still there." We sat in the afternoon light streaming through the diner's window, and I knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, quiet, hopeful, and new. For the first time in ages, I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead.